Imagine giving up your whole life for someone else's success, then being told you're not needed anymore. 40 years of being loyal wiped away with just a few words. But what happens when the person who is let go quietly becomes the person who has all the power? If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I remember that night well. It wasn't just what was said, but the quiet that came after. A quiet so heavy it felt like walls were closing in on me. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, the same bed I had made every morning for 40 years. The sheets were clean and neat, just how Veronica liked them. That's when she walked in. She had her hands in the pockets of the expensive pants I bought her last Christmas. "David," she said, not looking at me, "you need to pack your things." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. "Samuel deserves respect," she said calmly. "He's my husband now." I didn't hear the rest. My ears started ringing. My heart didn't beat fast. It stopped. I stared at her, not believing what I was hearing. I had given this woman my whole life. I stood behind her as she built her clinics. I helped her shake hands and make deals. People praised her for being ambitious, but they didn't know it was my hands doing the hard work behind the scenes. My savings paid for the first building. My name was on half the loans. I worked hard to keep everything together, and now I was being told I was no longer part of her story. As I stood there, my legs felt like jelly. I wanted to ask why, but my mouth was too dry. How could 40 years end like this? Was I really just a helper? What about all those nights I stayed up fixing problems she created? Did none of it matter? My mind raced with questions, but my body just stood there, frozen like a statue in our own bedroom. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up slowly like I had suddenly become 30 years older and walked to the closet. She gave me a check with a small amount of money, like I was an employee being fired. Enough for a month in a cheap hotel, maybe. Not enough for what I had given up. "I'll have someone come for your other things," she said. I packed one suitcase with just clothes. No photos, no memories to hold on to. I left that house without saying goodbye to anyone. Not to Veronica, not to Caleb, who once called me Dad but hadn't talked to me in years. Not even to the dog. It was just me, a suitcase with a broken wheel, and a cold Charleston night that suddenly felt strange. The suitcase wheel kept catching on the sidewalk like it was trying to hold me back, but I kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. I wondered if anyone would notice I was gone. Would the mailman wonder where I was? Would the neighbors miss seeing me water the flowers? I felt invisible even before she told me to leave. That's how she made me feel for years, like I didn't really exist. I thought about going to a hotel, but the idea made me feel sick. Instead, I took a bus to my sister's place. Grace opened the door looking suspicious. Her house smelled like lavender and judgment. She looked at my suitcase, then at my face. "What happened?" she asked, like she already thought it was my fault. "Veronica remarried," I said. Just that. She didn't invite me in right away. She didn't hug me. She stared at me for a moment. "Well," she finally said, stepping aside, "I guess I shouldn't say I told you so." She always said I wasted my life on a woman who never really saw me. I used to defend Veronica strongly. Not anymore. Grace gave me a guest room that smelled like old furniture. I stayed up all night staring at the ceiling, wondering who I was now. I had no job, no home, no children, just a name that no longer fit in anyone's story. The next morning, the sun came through the dusty window like it didn't care about my pain. I sat at the kitchen table with Grace, watching steam rise from my coffee. I felt like a ghost in my own life. Who was I without Veronica? Without the work I did for her? Without being called Dad by Caleb? I had no answers, just a heart full of questions. What would I do now? Where would I go? How do you start over at my age? The next morning she gave me black coffee and asked, "What are you going to do now?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. The week that followed was hard. Grace didn't have much patience, and her husband made little comments at dinner. "So you ever going to get back on your feet? What were you doing all those years? Just cooking and ironing? And worst of all, it's not like you had kids to raise." I wanted to shout, but I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet until I couldn't take it anymore. One morning I left a thank you note and took a bus downtown. I had a few resumes in my wallet, written by hand because I didn't have a computer. I walked into the small library near the historic district. The man behind the counter was about 35, tired but kind. I asked if they were hiring. He said they needed someone part-time at the front desk. I took the job, and that's where I started over. The library smelled like old books and quiet. It felt safe. No one knew my story here. No one expected anything from me. My first day, I put books back on shelves and felt my heart slow down for the first time in weeks. The books didn't judge me. They just needed to be in the right place. Maybe I needed that too. Somewhere I belonged. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about the library. It became my safe place, my quiet harbor in a storm of pain. The days at the library passed slowly. I put books back on shelves, answered phones, helped older men print recipes. No one knew who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I found peace in being invisible. But something inside me stayed sharp. Veronica had thrown me away like old news. But I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. One evening after work, I went to the small storage unit I had rented. I opened the box labeled Old Files, and that's when I found it, a paper that shouldn't exist. It had my name, my signature, but I never signed that. Never. My hands shook as I held the paper. This wasn't just a mistake. Someone had copied my signature. But who? Why? My heart pounded like a drum. I felt sick to my stomach. Could it be Veronica? No, that couldn't be right. She wouldn't do that to me, would she? I sat on the cold floor of the storage unit, staring at the paper like it might tell me the truth. What other lies had I been living? How many times had she used my name without asking? The questions kept coming, but I had no answers. Just a growing fear in my chest. I stood there under the buzzing light as the truth settled into my bones. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. And I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. It's strange how quickly people forget what you've done for them. Grace's voice still echoed in my ears. You were always too soft, David? Always waiting for someone to tell you you're good enough? You gave her your life, and what did you get? A goodbye and a small check. I couldn't argue. She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't kind either. I moved into a small basement apartment near the library. The walls were thin, and the faucet dripped no matter how tight I turned it. The radiator made noise like it was in pain, and the paint was peeling from the ceiling corners, but it was mine. The money was almost gone, so I started walking everywhere to save what little I had. I ate ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever was on sale at the corner store. I didn't complain. I didn't expect comfort anymore. At the library, no one asked about my past, and that was fine with me. I watched the world through the tall front windows. I watched fathers quiet noisy kids, students read textbooks, and older men meet for book club. I kept my head down, filed books, answered phones, said yes, sir, and no, ma'am, until my mouth was dry. I was like a shadow among strangers, but it was in that quiet routine that I started to breathe again. I met Mr. Edward, a retired teacher who came in every Thursday for historical books. He always wore bright scarves and had a loud laugh. He didn't ask many questions. He just talked about his cat, his hip surgery, the weather, and I liked listening. One day he said, "You've got kind eyes, son, like someone who's seen too much but is still gentle." I almost cried right there behind the desk. No one had said anything kind to me in months, maybe years. Even so, I still didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not about Veronica, not about Samuel, not about the 40 years that had disappeared. It was too embarrassing. Sometimes I'd sit in my little apartment at night and go through memories like they were evidence, trying to figure out how much of my life had really been mine. Veronica used to say, "You're the glue, David. You hold it all together." Funny. Turns out even glue gets scraped off when it's no longer needed. One Friday evening, I got home with sore feet and a headache from too many phone calls. I dropped my wallet on the floor and sat down on my old love seat and stared at the stack of boxes I hadn't touched since I moved in. Something made me stand up. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was a feeling. I opened one of the boxes and pulled out an old binder. Inside were papers from years ago, bank statements, loan documents, medical records. Half of it was old junk. Then I saw it. An envelope labeled Elliott Property Deed and Transfer. I froze. The Elliott property was land my parents left to me. A small piece of wooded land outside Columbia. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Always had been. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. There it was. My name, David E. Elliott. My signature at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My hands shook as I read the rest of the document. It said I had given Veronica full ownership of the land 10 years ago, that I had signed over the deed willingly. Only I hadn't. I knew my own signature. I'd written it 1,000,000 times. This wasn't it. My mind flashed back to that day 10 years ago. Veronica had asked me to sign some papers while I was cooking dinner. She said it was for tax reasons. I was tired from working all day. I didn't even look at what I was signing. I trusted her. Now I realized how stupid I had been. How many other times had she done this? How many other papers had I signed without reading? My stomach twisted with fear. What else had I lost, without even knowing? Was there anything left that was really mine? I sat there in the silence, the kitchen light humming above me, and stared at the lie written in ink. She stole from me. It wasn't just betrayal. This was fraud. My land, my name, my trust, all tricked behind my back. My mind raced, flipping back through memories. I remembered vaguely years ago Veronica asking me to sign some papers. She had said it was for tax reasons. I was busy, distracted. I trusted her. Of course I did. I felt sick. How much more had I missed? I put the envelope down and stood up, pacing the room. My skin felt too tight, my heart beating fast. All the embarrassment, the being kicked out, the years wasted, it was more than betrayal now. It was theft. And suddenly something changed inside me. A cold, quiet determination settled in my chest like a stone dropped in water. No splashing, no loud actions, just stillness. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I wasn't going to shout or demand justice. I was going to watch, learn, plan. I'd spent 40 years holding everything together while Veronica got the praise. Now I would take it all back, piece by piece, and I would do it without ever raising my voice, because a storm doesn't need to be loud to destroy everything in its path. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay on the love seat, fully dressed, the document sitting on the table in front of me like a snake, ready to strike. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that signature, that fake signature, making fun of me. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, thinking about memories I had ignored over the years. What else had she done? What else had I let her get away with? By morning I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go, and like all the other things I had ignored over the years, the quiet insults, the mean comments, the way she had started introducing me as just David at events. Like I was her helper instead of her husband, the way she told people I was never much into business, even though I was the one who managed the books for the first 3 clinics, while she played golf with investors. I made a list of everything I had stored in my memory. Financial documents, loan applications, deed. I started going through the rest of the boxes, pulling out anything with numbers, names, signatures, and that's when I found the second one. Another document, another transfer. This time, a power of attorney form dated 8 years ago, supposedly giving Veronica the right to act in my name for all money matters. I sat down slowly, holding the paper like it was dangerous. I had never seen it before, never signed it, but there was my name, my fake signature again. She didn't just steal from me once. She'd built a system around it. Quiet, clean, hidden behind marriage promises, and just signed this quick moments. And I had let her. I wasn't stupid. I was trusting. And there's a difference. The next morning, I called Clive. Clive Bennett had been my roommate in college. Life took us different ways, but we kept in touch on birthdays and holidays. Last I heard, he'd become a lawyer in Columbia. I didn't tell him everything over the phone, just that I needed to talk, and he didn't hesitate. He invited me over that Saturday. I wore a beige sweater that made me look older than I felt and brought the documents in a plastic grocery bag. Clive greeted me with a warm hug. His house was filled with plants and the smell of fresh coffee. I laid the documents on his kitchen table one by one and watched his face change from curious to worried to something like controlled anger. "David," he said, pointing at the power of attorney, "if this wasn't signed by you, this is felony fraud. Straight up." "I know," I whispered. He asked me many questions. When I first noticed things, what role I played in her business, how the assets were divided. I answered everything. With every word I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "You have a case," he said, "and it's bigger than you think." I didn't smile. I wasn't ready for victory. I just wanted to understand what she had done to me. Clive agreed to help me, but he also warned me, Taking legal action meant going public. It would get messy. It would get loud. That's when I told him what I was planning. Not lawsuits. Not tabloids. Not headlines. I want the truth to come out, I said, but not through courts, not with me front and center. I wanted to unravel around her, quietly, slowly. I want people to start asking questions. She can't answer. Clive raised an eyebrow. A silent takedown? I nodded. He smiled. That's the David I remember. Over the next week, I began gathering everything. Every receipt, every email, every bank notice, every note on a napkin. I'd been dismissed as useless for so long that Veronica had never imagined I was keeping track, but I had, out of habit, out of fear, out of love, maybe at some point. Now all those pieces would become the parts of something else entirely. I worked nights after my shift at the library, sorting and organizing, building a quiet collection of evidence. I bought a cheap computer at a pawn shop and made secret email accounts. I scanned documents. I took photos, and then on a rainy Tuesday, I opened a fresh document and gave it a name. The Real History of Veronica L. Morgan. Because if I was invisible for 40 years, it was time someone finally saw what I'd seen all along. And I wasn't done digging yet. Not even close. If anyone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be spending my nights scanning documents and investigating the woman I once called my wife, I would have laughed, but there I was, sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment, with a notebook in one hand, a glass of tea in the other, and my computer humming beside me. Clive had shown me how to search public records, property sales, business filings. I started slow, searching Veronica's name, then her business partner, then Veritas Health Solutions, LLC. I traced ownership histories, followed money trails that always seemed to land in Veronica's lap, even when the original assets were in my name. It was like peeling wallpaper and finding plywood underneath. She hadn't just used me, she'd built her business on me. One night, I found an old mortgage agreement. The mortgage was secured with collateral listed under my name, David Elliott Hill. A small note at the bottom read, "Borrower's spouse authorizes asset assignment." That was me. Except once again, I had never signed it. How many times had she done this? How many documents had she done this? How many documents had she faked while I cooked dinner or folded her laundry? It made me sick to think about it, but it also gave me purpose. Clive and I began putting everything together. He didn't file anything yet at my request. I wasn't ready for that kind of fight. What I wanted was control. I wanted every piece of the puzzle before I made my move. The real breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon at the library. I was putting books back when I overheard two men talking about Veronica. They were saying how she always had a heart for the community, how she helped open that free clinic for single mothers, how she just married that nice young man, Safswal. Something inside me snapped. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but I felt the tightness in my chest, the heat crawling up my neck. People loved her, they believed her. And I was just a small part in her story. That night I opened my computer and started writing letters. Not to lawyers, not to police. To people who work for her, employees, real estate agents, investors, journalists, council members. I wrote quietly, calmly. I attached a few scanned documents. Nothing too much, just enough to make people wonder. I signed them only with the initials D.H. Then I sent them from secret accounts, one by one. The next day I wrote more. It became a routine. I'd spend my mornings putting books back and saying hello to people, and my nights unraveling a life built on lies. It felt right. Quiet, judicious. One email turned into 3. 3 turned into 20. I didn't expect quick results, but once secrets are out there, they spread. And Veronica had a lot of them. One day, Clive called me and said, "I think I found something." He sent me a scanned copy of a will, not mine, not Veronica's. My father's. Clive circled a line in red, "All real property to be transferred solely to my son, David Hill." But according to county records, that land had transferred to Veronica less than 2 months after my father's death. The signature on the rear's form was faked by her. She hadn't just used me, she'd reached back through my family line, stealing from a man who trusted her like a daughter. That was when I stopped hesitating. The plan shifted. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about telling the truth, my truth, and making sure no one else could ever call her a hero again. I updated the digital file I'd started, The Real History of Veronica L. Morgan, and renamed it The Empire Built on My Silence, because that's what it was. She succeeded because I never spoke up, but I was done being quiet. I wasn't going to take her to court. I was going to take her apart one lie at a time. There's something strange about watching your own life unfold in front of you like evidence at a crime scene. Night after night, I sat at that kitchen table surrounded by folders, receipts, emails, and legal copies. Every paper I touched seemed to tell a story I had forgotten or chosen to forget. But now I listened. I wasn't the same man who stood quiet in the face of betrayal. I was becoming something else, and they didn't even see it coming. Everyone thought I had disappeared, that I was living out my days waiting for someone to care. But I was watching, I was remembering, and most of all, I was learning. I began visiting people from Veronica's past, starting with the ones she thought had vanished into the background just like I had been. Old clinic staff, construction workers, receptionists, secretaries. People forget how much power quiet people have. I met with Daniel, who used to manage the front desk at her first clinic. We sat at a tiny cafe. He looked older, but just as sharp as ever. He was cautious at first, but when I brought up Veronica's name, something changed in his eyes. "Why do you want to know?" he asked. I didn't lie. Because she destroyed my life, and I'm finally doing something about it. He sat back in his chair, stirred his tea, and after a long pause said, "Good." Then he told me things I never knew. About payments that didn't match the books. About a vendor who was paid double what they were owed, then disappeared. About whispers of secret bank accounts that no one ever dared to confirm. It wasn't just emotional manipulation or fraud. It was planned, and Veronica had counted on my silence to keep it all hidden. But there was something else, something Daniel said as he stood up to leave that stuck with me. "You know," he said, "she once told me she couldn't have done any of it without you." It wasn't a compliment, it was a confession. I left the cafe shaken. I'd always assumed I was the damage in Veronica's climb to the top. But the truth was worse. I had been the foundation, the one she everything on. The next day I went to see Clive again. I brought everything I had, notes, files, scanned documents. He was stunned by the scope of it all. "You basically built a case," he said. "But it's more than that. This is a history." I told him I wanted to make it public, but not in my name. Not yet. We created a secure folder online, set it to private, and began uploading everything under secret titles. Forged deeds, changed documents, timelines, employee statements, all checked and confirmed. Then I started sharing pieces to local forums. Charleston had many, business blogs, real estate groups. I wrote every post carefully, speaking in general terms, tagging people Veronica had worked with. I made them ask the questions for me. Isn't this the same land Veritas Health developed back in... Why does this power of attorney look off? Anyone know who DEH is? No one connected it to me. And still I wasn't done. One evening, I visited the small attic of the house I'd once called home. Not inside, it was Samuel's house now, but I knew Veronica hadn't cleared everything out. She never did the hard work herself. I climbed up there while Samuel was away and Veronica was overseas. I still had the old garage door code. I moved quietly like a ghost. That's where I found the file box. A plain black box labeled simply, Morgan, Personal. Inside, dozens of old folders, notes in Veronica's messy handwriting, and one envelope that stopped me cold. It had my father's name on it. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, a letter written by my father just weeks before he died. He had written it to me. I had never seen it, and Veronica had kept it from me all these years. In it, he said he was proud of me, that he trusted me with everything, that the land was meant to be my safe place, my freedom. He even warned me gently that money has a way of making some women forget who they are. I sat in that attic and cried for the first time in months, not out of sadness, but out of clear understanding. Veronica didn't just steal my land. She stole my father's final words, and that made this personal in a way I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. I copied the letter, took photos of every page, put everything back exactly how I found it, and I walked away, not with anger in my heart, but with firmness. Because now I had everything I needed. A plan, a reason, and a reason to see this through. I was no longer sad about the life I had lost. I was getting ready to take it back. It started with a quiet word, one secret post in a real estate forum, titled Looking Back at the Beginnings of the Veritas Health Clinics. Was there ever a paper trail? I kept the tone neutral, just asking questions, but I added a picture, one of the fake deed transfers that gave my land to Veronica. I didn't explain what it was. I let them wonder. Then I posted a second message in a business ethics blog. This time, I dropped a hint about fake signatures and property deals that had never gone through proper legal channels. I named no names, just dates and documents. By the next morning, people were talking. This sounds shady. Is this about Veronica Morgan? I worked with her years ago. It wouldn't surprise me. People were guessing, and that was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't interested in shouting from the rooftops. I wanted rumors. Rumors that felt just close enough to truth. People believe quiet words more than they believe loud declarations. It was time to become the quiet word. I created an email account under the initials DH and started sending copies of carefully chosen documents to a small list. 2 investigative reporters, 1 ethics teacher at the local university, and a blogger known for covering business scandals in Charleston. The subject line read simply, "When reputation is built on fraud." Inside, I attached the first fake document and included one sentence, "This is just the beginning." Then I disappeared from the inbox. No signature, no request for a reply, no clues. I waited, and while I waited, I kept working. I created a small secret phone and put in a few investor contacts I'd remembered from events and dinners. Names Veronica had mentioned when bragging about her business. I started texting them. Simple things. Questions. Suggestions. Ever wonder how Veritas Health got that Columbia lot back in? Check the property records for the Elliott estate. I'd be careful about tying your name to Veronica's next expansion. I signed nothing, but the phone calls started the next week. Not to me, to her. I knew because Clive sent me a clip from a voicemail he'd been sent by a contact inside the investor group. Veronica clearly worried, saying, "Someone's digging. They've got old documents." I smiled. That was the first time in 40 years I imagined her afraid. At the library, life went on. I put books back, smiled at the regulars, said hello to Mr. Edward, and helped a student find a copy of The Great Gatsby for an essay. No one had any idea what I was doing after dark. That made it even sweeter. But it wasn't just about making noise. I wanted careful timing. So I started marking my calendar. Mondays were for document drops, Wednesdays for email leaks, Fridays for secret posts. It wasn't chaos, it was a plan. I shared a scan of the power of attorney. Then a copy of the bank statement showing loan funds taken under my name. Then my favorite, a photo of the original letter from my father, dated and signed with his own handwriting, clearly visible. I cropped out personal details, but left just enough to make it undeniable. The caption was simple: a letter never delivered, a land never truly given. That post alone had many views. In 48 hours. Veronica's name started popping up in comment sections, always surrounded by question marks. And then came the local story. A Charleston business blog published The Empire Beneath the Surface. What we don't know about Veronica Morgan. They didn't accuse her directly. They just asked smart, uncomfortable questions. The kind that make investors nervous. That same night, I walked past the house that used to be mine. The porch light was out, the windows dark. I wondered if Samuel was beginning to sense it too. That cold feeling when you realize something isn't right. I wondered if he'd start asking his own questions. I hoped so, because the storm was coming, and I wasn't finished yet. I was just getting started. It started with Caleb. I didn't expect that. He'd spent the last 10 years pretending I didn't exist. When Veronica introduced Samuel as her real family and pushed me out, Caleb didn't even blink. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a shrug. I raised, not biologically, but I was the one who taught him how to tie his shoes, who showed up to every school meeting, who stayed up when he had a fever and made pancakes on Saturdays. Veronica was too busy building businesses to be a mother. But I was always there, until I wasn't needed anymore. Until Samuel came along and she conveniently forgot who taught him how to be kind. Or maybe he just chose not to remember. That's why I wasn't ready when he showed up. He came to the library. I was putting new books back when I saw him standing by the front desk, tall and uncomfortable in a pressed suit. "David?" he asked. I turned slowly, heart beating fast in my chest. He looked older, not in age, he was in his late 30s now, but in a way that told me he was tired. "Caleb," I said, "can we talk?" he asked. I led him outside to the bench beneath the magnolia tree. I didn't say anything, I just waited. "There's something going on," he said. "People are talking. Investors are pulling back. Mom's freaking out." I didn't react. He continued, voice low. "Someone's sharing documents. Real ones. Stuff no one should have access to." Still, I said nothing. "I thought it might be you," he said, looking at me now, really looking. "I mean, it would make sense." I stared out across the street, watching a couple walk hand in hand. "Why would it make sense?" He shifted. "Because you know everything. You were there, you always kept the books before the accountants took over. And because Mom," he hesitated, "because Mom never really gave you credit for any of it." The air between us hung heavy. Then quietly, he added, "And because I was cruel, I didn't see it before, or I didn't want to." He winced. "I deserve that." "No," I said. "You deserve the truth. You just chose not to ask for it." He looked down at his hands. "Why now?" I paused, then stood. I walked over to my bag and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside, the letter I had kept hidden for years. Not the original, just a copy, and with it a smaller envelope sealed in wax. I handed them to him. "What is this?" he asked. "Your father," I said simply, "his last words." He froze. "I found it in the attic. Veronica kept it from you, just like she kept a lot of things." He opened the larger envelope first, eyes scanning the letter. I watched as his expression changed. Confusion, disbelief, then pain. "He wanted you to stay as me," I said. "He trusted me to raise you, and I did, until the woman you called Mom decided I wasn't worth your time anymore." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up, eyes wet. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because you deserve to know who you are, where you came from, and who protected you even when no one else did." He opened the second envelope. Inside was a photo. The two of us at his 6th birthday. He was missing a front tooth, frosting on his chin. I was holding the cake, laughing. He said nothing, just stared. "I don't want anything from you," I told him. "Not apologies, not forgiveness, but I won't be your secret anymore." He stood slowly, folding the letter back into its envelope. "I'm sorry," he said. I gave a half smile. "Be sorry to yourself for what you let her turn you into." He nodded, and then he left. I watched him go without emotion, because this wasn't about making up. This was about truth. And now another crack had formed in Veronica's perfect little world, one that couldn't be sealed shut with lies anymore. And I had so much more left to reveal. The first time I saw Veronica's face on the local news, I didn't flinch. I didn't feel happy. I just sat on the edge of my bed with the volume low and my tea cooling in my hands. They didn't say her name outright. Not yet, but the anchor's tone was serious. A well-known healthcare leader in Charleston is facing questions regarding property deals and possible fake signatures connected to early business ventures. While no formal accusations have been made, documents shared with watchdog groups suggest a pattern of bad, possibly illegal behavior over 2 decades. And then in the corner of the screen, a blurry photo of Veronica shaking hands at an event. That was all it took. All I needed. One seed planted on live television. By morning, her office phone must have been ringing nonstop, and I knew exactly what would come next. Samuel, it wasn't hard to guess how he'd take it. He was ambitious, perfectly dressed, the kind of man who treated reputation like money, and Veronica had handed him a wallet full of fake bills. I didn't hear from him directly, but I didn't need to because 3 days later he found me. I was putting books back in the library when I heard shoes clicking against the old wood floor. I turned and there he was, hair slicked back, coat perfect, anger coming off him like heat in July. "You," he said, his voice sharp but quiet enough not to draw attention. "You're the one doing this." I blinked. "Doing what, Samuel?" He stepped closer. "Don't play dumb. The letters, the documents. You're trying to ruin her." I didn't respond. He looked around, eyes moving nervously. He looked around, eyes moving nervously toward the few people scattered across the room. Then he lowered his voice even further. "Why now? After everything she did for you, after all these years." I finally met his eyes. "You think she gave me something?" I said. "She took from me, Samuel. My money, my land, my life. She built that business on my name, my silence, and my trust. And you're just the next man she's using." He flinched just slightly. "I love her," he said, but it came out unsure. I gave a sad smile. "You don't know her," he hesitated. "Then why not just move on? You could have taken the check, started over. Why go to war?" I leaned in, quiet but firm. "'Cause I spent 40 years being erased, and I won't be erased again." He didn't speak after that, just stared as if he were trying to read me for the first time, and realizing he couldn't, then he turned and walked out without another word. But something had changed. I knew the look in his eyes. Doubt. And it would grow. By the end of that week, I got confirmation. An anonymous tip sent to Clive revealed that Samuel had hired a private lawyer, not for Veronica, for himself. He was beginning to look into things. He had access to her personal files, her safe, her private emails. And while he didn't know it, he was about to find everything I had already found and more. Clive called me one night, voice tense with disbelief. He found the originals. He said deeds, letters, loan documents, even some personal recordings. She kept everything, like she never thought anyone would challenge her. I felt something stir in my chest. Not quite victory, but justice coming into focus. Samuel didn't reach out again, but I didn't need him to, because he had seen the problems in the foundation, and he was beginning to understand just how deep it went. The walls were closing in now. Veronica had spent decades controlling the story, the money, the people, but now the people closest to her were watching her fall apart, and all I had done was tell the truth, quietly, steadily. And I wasn't stopping until the whole house came crashing down. They say the truth always finds a way to the surface, but in Veronica's case, it didn't float. It was pulled up, page by page, signature by signature, betrayal by betrayal. It started with Samuel. He must have waited until she was out of town again. Some health tech meeting in Denver. Clive's source told us Samuel entered her office at night, alone. He had the passcode to her private safe. Of course he did. He was her husband after all. Inside he found the black box, the one I had found weeks earlier, but he didn't just peek inside like I had. He opened every file. He read every contract, listened to every recorded phone call saved on USB drives, saw every lie, every name faked, every land deed rewritten without permission. He saw my father's letter. He saw my name on documents I never signed. He saw the signature she had practiced until it looked like mine. And for the first time, Samuel finally understood who he had married. He took it all, made copies, scanned it, put it all on a flash drive. Then he did what Veronica never expected him to do. He gave it to a lawyer. Clive called me that morning, his voice full of surprise. "He gave me everything, David," he said. He came into my office, sat down, and said, "I didn't sign up for this. I won't be part of it. He's out." I didn't say a word, just let the quiet wrap around me like armor, because I already knew the house of cards had finally started to fall. Over the next few days, things moved fast. Clive took the drive and filed an anonymous complaint with the North Carolina Department of Revenue, then with the Secretary of State's office. It was out of our hands now, but still very much in our favor. Veronica returned from Denver to chaos, silent phone calls, cold shoulders, an emergency board meeting, a legal notice slid under her office door. She must have thought she could explain it away. She always did. But this time, there were too many problems, too many mistakes, too much proof. And worst of all, there was no bad guy to point to, no dramatic public accusations, no courtroom scene, just the quiet falling apart of decades of lies. And I stayed quiet, watched it all from a distance, like a storm I didn't need to run from anymore. People began whispering in higher circles. How did she get away with it for so long? Was her husband involved? Did anyone ever meet the first man? What was his name again? They remembered me now. Not as Veronica's husband, but as the one who vanished and came back with the truth. I heard through Clive that Samuel had moved out, took only what he brought into the marriage in the flash drive. That changed everything. As for Caleb, he'd gone quiet too. Rumor was he'd begun the process of legally removing the Morgan name from his financial holdings. He hadn't called me again. I didn't expect him to, but I knew he saw it now. The lie of it all. One afternoon, I walked by Veronica's clinic in the old historic district. It was closed. A white sheet of paper taped to the door read, "Closed for restructuring." The building looked tired, like it finally felt the weight of all it had carried. I stood there for a long moment, not happy, not proud, just calm, because it wasn't about getting back at her anymore. It was about truth, and the truth had finally spoken, loud enough for the world to hear. There was a moment, just one, that made everything pause. It was early morning. The air was fresh. The streets quiet. I was walking to the library with a warm cup of coffee in hand, when my phone buzzed with a message from Clive. Just one line. "They're publishing it today." I stood still on the sidewalk, staring at the screen like it might change. But it didn't. That was the day my story, my truth went public. The article came out on a local but well-respected independent blog that specialized in investigative journalism. It wasn't tabloid gossip. It was clean, factual, serious. The empire built on silence, how David Hill was erased, and how he took his story back. The title alone made me sit down on the nearest bench. I read the whole thing slowly, breath catching at certain parts. It didn't tell every secret. It didn't need to. It laid out the timeline, how Veronica Morgan got land and business money through fake documents, how a power of attorney appeared under strange conditions, how key parts of her business were quietly bagged by a man she later threw away like a used handkerchief. They didn't name me as the source, but they didn't have to. The city knew, and the silence I had lived under for decades broke like glass. I received messages that week, dozens of them, some from strangers, some from people I hadn't heard from in years. One from an old friend I hadn't seen since my wedding said, "David, I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. I didn't ask. I should have." But the message that caught me off guard came from the Raleigh Men's Advocacy Network. They asked if I would speak at a panel about older men's money abuse and emotional neglect. I almost said no, but then why not me? So I said yes. The event was held at a small community center. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, plastic pitchers of water, a modest stage with two other men. One who had lost everything to a bad caregiver. Another who had been tricked by his own son. And then me. I stood at that podium and looked out at a room full of men with tired eyes and strong backs. Some held notebooks. Some held tissues. Most just held on. "My name is David Hill," I said, and I was erased slowly, quietly and willingly, because I loved someone who taught me to shrink. I told them the truth, not every detail, but enough to make them nod, get choked up, reach for each other's hand. And when I finished, there was no applause, just silence. And then, one by one, they stood. It wasn't celebration, it was togetherness. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was standing too. Not behind someone, not in someone's shadow, but as myself. Veronica, meanwhile, was fighting to stay afloat. She'd sold off one of her clinics to settle quiet claims, the rest under review, her reputation in question. Her board seat stopped. She hadn't made a public statement. Couldn't, because how do you defend what's already falling apart? Caleb had issued his own statement, carefully worded, saying he was sorry for not speaking up and thanking those who did. I didn't reply to him. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need to end with getting back together, only with truth. I still lived in the same small apartment, still walked to work, still sorted books, and helped teenagers with overdue fees. But now people smiled at me differently. Like they saw me not as someone who was hurt, but as the man who lived quietly for 40 years and then rewrote his own story. And still I wasn't done, because getting back your worth doesn't come in headlines or court rulings. It comes in choices, and my final one was still waiting for me. Getting back your worth doesn't arrive like a firework. It comes quietly, almost unsure of its welcome. You don't notice it at first. You're too busy watching your enemies fall, too caught up in the slow feeling of justice settling like dust around their polished shoes. But when it comes, it's unmistakable. Veronica had vanished from the spotlight. The woman who once filled local newspapers with her charity work, who gave interviews about building communities, who stood behind podiums like a queen, was now hard to reach. Her publicist gave cold statements. Her board said she was taking a break. Translation: they were cutting time. The Morgan name, once respected, now carried too much weight to hold up any business. And the final blow came in an article from a national outlet, one that reached far beyond Charleston. It confirmed what we already knew. Veronica was under federal investigation for fraud, misrepresentation of assets, and abuse of power of attorney. Her legal team had gone into crisis mode. Her investors left her. Her clinics were being restructured. And in the middle of it all, Caleb did something unexpected. He hosted a dinner, a private one, just a few people. And he sent me an invitation. Clive told me I didn't have to go. You've done enough, David. You don't know anything. He was right. But I went anyway. It was held at a restaurant I remembered from when Caleb was a boy. Back then, we went for special occasions. Birthdays, report cards, quiet little victories. Now it was filled with people I didn't recognize. Faces I'd seen in newspapers. Associates, board members, partners, trying to save what they could from what Veronica had left behind. Caleb stood near the window, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my yearly pay. When he saw me, he crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice quiet. I nodded. We didn't hug. He led me to a table off to the side, away from the others. He didn't make a speech, didn't show off, just handed me a small envelope. "I'm removing the Morgan name from my foundation," he said, "starting over under a different name." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, the deed to the Elliott property. My land, my family's legacy restored. My eyes hurt, but I didn't cry. Not in front of him, not after everything. This was never hers to give. I said, "I know," Caleb replied. "I just wanted to be the one to put it back where it belongs." We didn't speak again that night, and that was fine. Closure doesn't always come in warm hugs. Sometimes it comes in the quiet exchange of a name being returned to the hands that earned it. As I left the restaurant, I looked back one last time, not at Caleb, but at the life I was walking away from. The man who entered that building had once been invisible. The man who walked out was anything but. And in my pocket, folded like a treasure map, was a future I was finally ready to claim. There's something special about untouched land. No noise, no concrete, no pretending. Just trees that have stood longer than most promises and earth that remembers who it belongs to. I stood there at the edge of my parents' land, the Elliott property, as the sun shone through the Carolina trees. It had taken decades to come back here. Not because I couldn't, but because I thought I didn't deserve to. Because Veronica made me believe I had no claim to anything beyond her shadow. But now, this land was mine again. Officially, without question, I'd brought only a few things with me. A folding chair, an old photograph of my father, and a manila folder stamped with county permits. Inside were plans for a place I never thought I'd live to see. It wouldn't be big, just one building, a small house turned center, tucked into the trees, a safe place, a place for men who had been erased, discarded, or overlooked, just like I had been. It would be called the Beacon, because sometimes all we need is someone to remind us that we're still here, that we still matter. I used the money I received quietly. Samuel's final act of making things right, perhaps. I never spoke to him again. Didn't need to. He assigned over rights to avoid being dragged into the legal problems that swallowed Veronica whole. As for Veronica, the last I heard, she was living alone in a condo out west. No title, no board seat, no legacy, no business. She disappeared from the public, like smoke after a fire, and I let her go. I had better things to do. Opening day came on a Saturday. Simple, no press, no ribbon cutting. Just a gathering of men, some with gray hairs, some young, all carrying stories that had never been heard in rooms that never listened. We sat in a circle, drinking lemonade from paper cups, sharing quiet strength. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't practice anything. I just stood. "My name is David Hill," I said. "For 40 years I was the backbone of something I never got credit for. I gave everything to someone who told me I was lucky just to be beside her, and when I had nothing left to give, she told me to go." I paused, but she forgot something. She forgot that men like us, we don't stay gone. We watch, we wait, and when the time is right, we rise. A soft sound of agreement passed through the group. Heads nodded, eyes filled with tears. "And I don't need applause," I added. "I don't need headlines. I just need you to know you're not invisible. You never were." We didn't clap. We just sat together in the light. And I felt peace for the first time in my life. Not because I had won, but because I had reclaimed my name, my voice, my worth. And as the trees swayed gently behind us, I knew my story was no longer about what I had lost. It was about what I chose to build, quietly, steadily, unforgettably. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and hype the video. Feel free to share your story in the comments. Your story matters to us.